So a bride wrote to Slate magazine for advice. She says that she's being pressured to include her future sister-in-law in her bridal party. The issue is that she doesn't want to do this because the woman makes racist comments that make everyone uncomfortable. So how do you navigate this? What would you do in this situation?
I think it's becoming less and less socially acceptable, obviously, to say overtly racist things. So I hear it less and less. I will say that my own grandfather, my Italian grandfather, he would often use the N-word to refer to things. Instead of, not people, but not that there's a difference really. And we would call him up and say, we'd say, Grandpa, we were kids at the time, and we would call him out. But if he's passed away, but if he were still around now, I would definitely sit him down and talk to him about why that was unacceptable to say. But it's the more subtle forms of racism and more covert ones that I think are in a way more insidious and more challenging for us to deal with. And I think it's another reminder of why it's so important to have diverse workspaces and diverse circles of friends. And I'm going to share a story to call myself out. When I was a young producer starting out, I was working on a documentary series, and we traveled around, and I went and did this story in New York City about a group of black strippers, male strippers. And I loved this story, and I loved the people that I met through the story, but I came back and I was quite excited. And I happened to mention to a colleague about how I felt that the culture that I was exposed to was so amazing. And she called me out. And she called me out on what I was saying. Even though I thought I was giving a compliment, she highlighted the fact that what I was saying was actually quite monolithic and quite problematic. And she sat me down and explained to me why. And I have never forgotten that moment. And by the way, that woman's name is Alison Duke. She's a Canadian filmmaker, and she's an activist, and she's an artist, and everyone should know about her. And I think it was a moment that stood out in my life where I didn't think I was being problematic, and I was. And I needed to sit back and sit down and listen. And now, as I'm hearing from my black friends, it's like many of my black friends are saying, we're tired of doing this work. Now we, as activists and allies, also have to do that work to call out other people when we hear problematic language and problematic behavior.
Yeah, I totally agree with Cynthia with how we're all kind of like looking at our own complacency and how that makes us complicit and trying to change. That's why we're talking about this. And I go to Katina on Facebook, who wrote to us and said, clearly it happened to Katina. And so they say, I got up and walked out of a family meal when a family member, my aunt, used a racial slur. And I think that would be difficult, Katina. So good on you for a lot of people to walk out of the room, right? Because you are making things uncomfortable. And we all have been conditioned to socially lubricate, as in to be as diplomatic as possible, to go back to our prime minister, diplomacy, let things go, or at least make sure on the appearances are good. And so, because none of us wants to be uncomfortable. And I think what I'm learning, and probably a lot of you, is that our discomfort is violent to people of color, particularly Black people. Microaggressions and macroaggressions hurt. Where we are uncomfortable, that's almost a luxury. But when you are a Black person on the receiving end of a slight, as Kathleen Newman-Bermang said yesterday, that is violent. It's a form of violence. And so maybe the way to move forward is to, in these situations, tweak our perspective about who gets to be uncomfortable and what kind of violence you're sparing to victims of racism. And so in this case, with this wedding, having the uncomfortable conversation and saying to the sister-in-law, hey, sorry, you can't come, is putting the guests at your wedding who may be the recipients of potentially violently racist topics at the forefront instead of prioritizing your own comfort.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with Kathleen and everything that you're saying, Lane. I was just thinking as you were talking about, rooms that I've been in, and as a Black woman not speaking up when somebody has said something offensive because, you don't want to rock the room. I remember being in a newsroom. the Rodney King riots had taken place. And a news anchor actually turned to me and said, why are you so different? I mean, you're so nice. And I was so taken aback, but didn't say anything. But that woman of, 25 years ago no longer exists. And silence is no longer an option. So whether it's at the dinner table or whether it's executives or whether it's people on social media, I mean, I often get called out on social media for the things that I say on our show. And so many people will say, well, Mars, just don't respond, ignore it, they're trolls. But then that's silence. And silence tells people who are doing the wrong thing, who are firing verbal shots, that it's okay to do that. And it's not okay to do that.
I've said that to you.
I want to jump on that,
apologize.
Marcy, because
Lane, you said it because you care.
I have.
You want to protect me.
I've told
That's
you,
why you
like,
said
don't engage. But now I realize, yeah, you can't be silent. So let me be clear on national television. I'm sorry, that was wrong.
I love you, Lane, but you were protecting me. You know the mental toll that it takes on me sometimes, and you just wanted me to back up and rest and not have to deal with it. And I will also say that you deal with it a lot too. And a lot of the time you were coming, to my aid, helping me and telling people to back up off of me. So I appreciate you always and love you very, very much.
Mel, I cut you off. Please go ahead.
no, this is the exchange that has to be happening. I was just going to throw it to Judy on Facebook because she wrote out to us and is expressing similar sentiments. And she had said, I will ignore the family member and walk away. They don't get it and never will. And I will say, Judy, that I think if you just heard that exchange between Marcy and Lainey, I think that is the difference, is that I don't think the luxury now exists for anybody to just ignore and just walk away. Because if that person is never challenged, there will never be a possible change. And I've been putting this all over my social media that white silence equals black pain. And when you choose to say nothing, that is as you said, Lainey, off the top, that is in and of itself a major part of the problem. So that is now time for us to get uncomfortable and to face it. You're not facing it for you. You're not even facing it just to try to change that person. You're doing it for the fact that you have family and friends and who are Black, and that you are an ally. You're doing it for them, perhaps more so than even the aggressor on the other side.
And I do think we have to take a deep look at ourselves. Like, it's easy for white people in particular to get on their high horse, and they may think of themselves as very well-meaning and certainly not racist. But you have to look a little bit deeper at your own lives. Who are the people you surround yourself with? What does your community look like? I know so many people who live in predominantly white communities, and you just have to start wondering, why did I choose to live here? And what does it mean that I chose this school district for my children because I thought it was the best and the safest? Why am I not also prioritizing looking around and trying to make sure that all school systems are equitable and that all communities are safe? If you are, for example, also allowing your child to go around saying things like all lives matter, it's incumbent upon you as a parent to start talking to your children about the fact that that is a problematic statement that is extremely painful to people who are trying to highlight the inequities right now that are going on. So again, if you haven't had those types of conversations with your children, if you aren't looking out your own front door, you're kind of part of the problem. And again, I'm not perfect either. I'm certainly not saying that I am. I got to do better too.
Yeah, 100%. Just happy that we continue to have these conversations and they won't end here on the show.